show it as Marcy. So, thank you. Marcy CDs are for sale out in the lobby. As always, take her home with you on disc. So I want to show you guys a little fun thing. I drove up this morning and I never get tired of seeing this. So Dave, would you go to the slide? I took these pictures from my iPhone and uploaded them this morning. I don't know if you can see, but there are 12 elk in the driveway. I couldn't even get in. But then next picture, there are, like 7 or 8 in that picture over on the other side. Next one. It's the lag there. I don't know if you can see up over the railing. There are elk up in the trees in the yard here. Next one. So this guy just happened to block getting in. Several of us had to walk through the snow to get around because just didn't want to move from the front door. Next one. And the next one. And then we walked in, so Eugene was right behind me, and he started bugling at me when he got out of the car. So then he and I walked in. I think the next one is then we took from the social hall. Next. Oh, one more. Oh, sorry. Lots of them. I was so enthralled. I never get tired of seeing them. Okay, good. And that's up in back of the social hall. Just go ahead, Dave, and click through there. Just a few more. We saw a couple babies and a couple bulls and a lot of cows. And is that it? Maybe one more. There. So I never get tired of seeing them. I just never do. And so anyway, I want to share with you they're the early crowd. They're the 8 o'clock service. You guys are the 10 o'clock. So anyway, that was fun. That always lifts my spirits when I see nature around us like that. And with the snow, it's so quiet. It's just so good. So the topic of my talk today is from managing to leading, using the science of mind in your life. So we just spent the first 4 weeks of January in our Back to Basics series, where I summarized kind of the first 4 chapters of Ernest Holmes' textbook, The Science of Mind. And I talked about, we dug deep and we really deconstructed a lot of what the science of mind means. And some of it might have felt a little redundant, but it was really getting deep into the thing itself and what it does and the way it works and how to use it. And so we got very specific on each of those topics. But I thought today, since January has 5 Sundays, that it would be nice to wrap that all up and what the heck does that all mean in your life? And so it occurred to me that what Ernest Holmes is trying to do in the textbook is he's trying to get us from just managing, just getting by, just taking life as it comes, to actually leading and becoming the leaders in our own life, and to setting the tone for what we want, and then making it happen. And that's a leap from managing to leading. And many of us don't always do that. A lot of us sit back and wait for life to happen. And we actually hear this in New Thought a lot. We hear things like, well, God brought me this, so I should probably take it. That's managing. It's like, well, this is what's in front of me, and so I'm kind of stuck with it. Leading is saying, well, God brought me this, but this isn't what I want, so I'm going to go create a different experience. That's leading. So we don't want to get stuck in managing. Nothing wrong with managing. Nothing wrong with managing tasks as we are leading towards something greater. Management is a step toward leading. It should not be a way of life. One of the things that struck me as I was creating this talk is that where this really comes from is a grounding in the sense that we are made in the image and likeness of the all-powerful divine presence. Now, of course, we all know that and say that, oh, I'm just like God. God is in us. I am one with God. But we are it. We are it. I mean, wrap your head around that for a minute. We are all that God is. So if we think that God can do anything, because it's God, spiritual mind treatment. And if you were to see a practitioner, if you have seen a practitioner, or if you are a practitioner, you know this. And what it does is in the first 2 steps, we recognize, we really claim that God is all powerful, and then we claim that so are we. And I heard it said that if we could just stop there, we don't need to do anything else. We don't need to pray for the thing out here that we want. We can just stop there. But sometimes we get the sense that we are less than, or unworthy of, or not enough, and that when we get this thing out here that we're praying for, then we'll be okay. And that's why it doesn't come. When we have more money, then I'll be okay, so I'm going to pray for more money so I can be okay. When I have a relationship and someone to love me, then I'll be okay, so I'm going to pray for someone to love me so that I can be okay. But that's exactly backwards. The thing the first 4 chapters of the textbook says, and when we go from managing to leading, that we have to know is that we start okay. We bring the okay to every situation. We bring it. We don't need it. We bring it. I read a book when I went through my first divorce, and it said that love sometimes gets messed up because we look at it as a commodity, and we want the other person to bring us what we're missing. And so we look for that person who can bring us the love we seek because we're missing something. And that if they do it well, then everything is hunky-dory, but nobody can do it well all the time, and that's when things fall apart. True relationships last, good relationships last, when we are so full of love for ourselves and the world that we just spill it out all over our partner, and that's where the love comes from. It wells up from within and comes out. That's the relationship. So that's the overall leap from managing to leading. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to be proactive. We have to be proactive, and I don't just mean this like plan ahead, make sure you've got an ice scraper in your car for tomorrow. By the way, make sure you have an ice scraper in your car because it's supposed to snow tonight. But I don't mean just that. I mean, be proactive in your life. Be proactive in your life. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? Do we know what we want?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, you're excused. I think we know what we want, but why do we want it? Do we want it so we'll be okay? Or do we want it because that joy and that passion wells up in us? And we just can't help it, it just bubbles up, and we're like, yes, this would be so much fun to do, I want this. And that's how we get to be proactive. Ernest Holmes is very clear, all through the textbook. We set the vision and we get what we want. So we get to be proactive. Stephen Covey, it's one of his 7 habits of highly effective people. Be proactive. Now, I love this figure from history, and that's Andrew Carnegie. And I think Andrew Carnegie is not only a great leader, but he's a great example of being proactive. Andrew Carnegie, for those of you who don't know him, he was born penniless. They immigrated from Scotland. He and his family immigrated here from Scotland in the 1840s, I want to say. He started his first job as a bobbin boy in a textile mill because he was little. And so these bobbin boys, this was dangerous. These big mills and the looms are going, and what the bobbin boys would do is they had to hire little boys because they would have to scoot between the looms to change the bobbins while the machines are still running. And so it was actually the bobbin boys that led, and all the deaths, that led to child labor laws, ultimately. So he started as a bobbin boy, not exactly glamorous. Through his work as a bobbin boy, he got kind of promoted, and people saw his industriousness, and he became one of he worked in the mailroom, became one of the telegraph operators, and then he was found by the head of the Pennsylvania Railroad and became a telegraph operator there, and then he became the personal assistant to the head of the Pennsylvania Railroad, then he bought the Pennsylvania Railroad, and then the Civil War came, and there were huge processes that changed the Bessemer process that made steel a reality. You didn't have to use pig iron anymore, you could use steel because it was now strong. And so he started steel. And then I feel like I'm back in my days of teaching history. Andrew Carnegie is in charge of, what? Vertical integration class. He created the idea of vertical integration, which meant that he owned all the steps of the process. So he started a steel mill, but that meant that he had to buy coal from someone. Well, When the coal suppliers would want to raise their prices or charge too much, he'd go buy the coal mine. So then he owned the coal mines and the steel mills, but then he had to get the coal from the mines to the mills, and if the railroads wanted to charge too much, he'd buy the railroad. And then when the railroads, I mean, he owned all the steps. Now, how is that being proactive? Andrew Carnegie was not a billionaire when he bought these things. But he saw the need for it, he had the vision, he set the vision in motion, and the resources were made available for him to do it. He couldn't just write a check for the railroad when he bought it, but he said that this is what we need, and he talked about this is what we need, and he didn't stop at anything until he got what he needed to create the vision he had, and he got it. One by one, became the richest man in America. But here's the other thing he did that was proactive. In 1901, he was ready to retire. Well, let me first say, while he still owned Carnegie Steel, which was the largest corporation in the United States at the end of the 19th century, he refused to take a salary greater than $50,000 a year. Now, $50,000 a year back then was a hefty salary. You know, it might have been like $1 million a year now, maybe not quite that much, but it was a good hefty salary. But the company was worth millions and millions and millions, and he refused to take any more, putting it all into a foundation and putting it back in the business. So he decided exactly what he needed to live, and he lived a good life. But he didn't take any more as an external sign that he was okay. He knew he was okay. He knew he had all he needed. So he took exactly enough to be comfortable, put the rest first back into the business. In 1901, his arch rival, J.P. Morgan, approached him and said, "You're getting kind of old there, Andy. Why don't you retire?" Andrew Carnegie agreed. Sold Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan, who coupled it with some other steel companies, created U.S. Steel, and it was the first corporation worth $1 billion in 1901. So what did Carnegie do with all of that money? He built libraries. How proactive is that? He didn't go cruise the Caribbean. He didn't go buy an island. He didn't keep it for himself. He realized that in order for America to be strong, we needed an educated public. And he knew where he'd come from as a bobbin boy. And so he wanted to make education available to everyone. And so he built libraries, public libraries. They're everywhere. And you kind of start to know the architecture. If you've seen one Carnegie library, you can spot it a mile away. If you've ever been to the Melting Pot in Littleton, that used to be a Carnegie library. I mean, their buildings are everywhere. Proactive. He was a leader. He was a leader because he knew at the heart of everything that he had everything he needed. He was one with his source. So he could afford to be so generous because he wasn't using it to build up himself. He was proactive. So when we go from managing to leading in our own lives, we be proactive. We know that we get what we need. We take care of ourselves first. But we don't need to be extravagant about it or have a lot more than we need in order to justify our existence. We take what we need, and then we think of greater picture. We think of bigger vision, and we move toward that. So we be proactive. We are proactive. The second thing, I got so into Andrew Carnegie, I'm sorry, I love him so much. I really do, I really admire this man who could have had anything, and did have everything, and still had enough to share, because he knew there'd be enough. So we have to be proactive. The second thing we have to do is we have to develop our emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is one of those amazing buzzwords right now in the field of leadership and business and potential and emotional intelligence. But studies have shown that emotional intelligence is a far greater indicator of success than intellectual intelligence. The other thing is that IQ never changes, they say, but EQ can be developed. So emotional intelligence, have you ever been around someone that is standing there in a 40-year-old body acting like a 12-year-old, and you're kind of amazed? I think that every time I read the news about Congress, frankly. I actually did send remember when the government shut down a couple years ago in October, I actually did send a long email to my congressperson about, what are you people, 12? Please grow up and find a solution to this, Okay, so that wasn't showing my emotional intelligence. However, emotional intelligence is made up of awareness. And I love that that was in Steph's reading. It's made up of awareness. Ernest Holmes says all through the textbook that it's about awareness. We can't change what we're not aware of. And when we become aware of things, we get more of them. So when we become aware of the beauty, we see more beauty. When we become aware of the abundance, we get more abundance. When we become aware of the love, we get more love. When we become aware of our own inner world, we start to see it everywhere. So that's the good news when your inner world is at peace. That's the news we all hate to hear when our outer world is in tumult and there are jerks everywhere. We don't want to hear that that's a reflection of who we are, but it is. It's operating below our level of awareness. The work on emotional intelligence divides it into 4 subcategories. Self-awareness. Do we know what we're feeling at any time? Can we be aware of it? Have you ever had someone say, "Why are you angry?" And you literally, you really say, "I'm not angry," and you mean it at the time? Even though you're like, "I'm not angry." Why would you say that? I don't feel angry at all. I'm totally at peace right now. I hate you say that to me. And you really, really don't think you're angry? I mean, that's the thing. It's not just that you're putting on a good face, but you really, really don't think you're angry? Having self-awareness is knowing, "Ooh, wow, there's something churning right there. I wonder what that is. I should maybe check that out before I go yell at my staff." Self-awareness. And then here's the next, self-management. Self-management. This is one thing that I sometimes struggle with people in New Thought, because we think that if we feel it, we should be able to just say it. Because we're authentic, we're just being our authentic selves. Right? It's just who I am. Self-management means, is this really what I want to say? Is this really being proactive? Is this really being a leader? Or is this just me wanting to grow up all over you? And if I'm just growing up all over you, maybe we should think about that. And then there's social awareness, which is understanding relationships. And I think we've all had that experience where we walk into a room and like everybody shuts up and looks at us, and we get the sense that maybe something was happening before we walked in. That's social awareness. But it's also having the awareness to think through relationships and how people are going to be impacted by things. And not just saying, "Oh, well, it's the way it is, too bad," but actually taking that into consideration. And then there's relationship management. And relationship management is having the awareness of how someone else is going to take something. And the number one thing on this is empathy. Empathy. We get to be empathetic. I think that there's a woeful lack of empathy at times in the world. We don't understand what other people are feeling or how news is going to hit them. And when we have empathy, that's another big buzzword right now in workplaces. Empathy in the workplace, empathy in the workplace. There's a great story. I saw a leadership speaker a week ago, a guy named Dan Quiggle, and he used to be on the staff of, he used to be on Reagan's staff. And he tells this great story about his own company. He went on to start multiple companies, and now he's a multimillionaire several times over. And he currently owns American Title. And here's a great example of empathy. He had a staff member, one of his managers came in, and there was a client, I guess it was a total jerk, and she comes in and she's like, "This guy is treating me in a way no one should treat me. I'm not going to work with him anymore." Now, this is happening in 2008. You know what's going on in the real estate industry in 2008, and American Title is needing all of the money it can get, all the clients it can get. They're kind of struggling to write home loans, and so he says to his manager, he says, "Well, can't you find a way to work with him? I mean, just don't take it personally. I know he's a jerk, but just don't take it personally." And she's like, "No, he is abusive, he is derogatory, and I refuse to write the paper. And so I'll turn in my resignation right now. If you want to fire me, but I am not working with this guy." And so Dan Quiggle initially said, "Well, I have to think about this. This is a problem because he needs her to write this deal." So he leaves and he starts thinking about it through the lens of emotional intelligence. And he says, what's more important, this deal or this manager that has been with me for years and has given her life to my company and believes in it and is being ill-treated? She's not just doing this on a whim. So he left the office and he calls her on his cell phone and he says, you know what? I was not empathetic. I understand how hard this must be. And you're really in pain. This is not okay. And because I empathize, don't write the paper. I'll be there for his meeting. I'll sit in there, and if he gets abusive, I personally will escort him out the door. And you just tell him up front, you're not going to work with him anymore. Well, the guy came in. The woman walked in there, took a deep breath, and said, in her mind, I have Dan's support on this. Sat down, worked with him, wrote the paper. And because she changed her attitude, the client was perfectly well behaved, did not have to be escorted out. But it was because as a leader, Dan Quiggle showed empathy to her. He had the relationship awareness. But again, empathy goes back to, I'm okay. I can't empathize with what you're feeling if I think that I'm wounded. Have you ever talked to someone and they said, oh God, I had a hard day? And your answer is, you think you had a hard day? Let me tell you about my day. Empathy is, oh God, I had a hard day. Really? That must have been really hard. Tell me about it. What happened? How was it hard? Is there anything I can do for you? When you can move your relationship awareness and your emotional intelligence to be like that, now you become a leader in your own life. And you become a leader in your immediate circle of influence because you know you're okay and you have that emotional intelligence. And then the last thing to go from managing to leading is make no excuses. Make no excuses. You're all sitting here in a room where we teach that we are one with the divine, the omnipotent, omniscient, all-powerful creator of the universe, and that we have access to that same power at every moment. What excuse could you possibly come up with? I was too tired? Okay, take a nap. Well, I didn't think of it. Okay, you did now. Do it now. Make no excuses. There's a great story about this guy named Robert Brown. Robert Brown, he's African American. He grew up in High Point, North Carolina. When he was a little boy, his grandparents had been slaves, or his grandparents had been the children of slaves. His great-grandparents had been slaves. So his grandmother used to tell him a story about slavery. But his grandma gave him a book. And he read it and went on to become the first African-American police officer in High Point, North Carolina. He was recruited by the FBI, moved to New York City, worked for the FBI, started a consulting firm on bringing diversity into corporations. In 1960, before affirmative action, keep in mind, in 1960, African-Americans still couldn't vote in the South. So he creates this organization in North Carolina in 1960. He's hired by Richard Nixon as a special assistant on how to put affirmative action into play. He goes out to South Africa where he meets Nelson Mandela and is so overwhelmed by the issues of apartheid and how books were being banned that he starts a foundation called Book Smart. And I'm going to let him tell you the rest of the story. Dave, can you hit play?
This is Mr. Brown. He's the most remarkable man you've probably never heard of. He's changed the lives of millions of people, including mine. So today, we change his. But before you know the end of the story, let's start from the beginning. When he was a little boy, he loved to read.
I read everything I could get my hands on. Newspapers and magazines from the garbage. We were poor. We didn't have money to buy all these books.
But there was one book in particular that changed his life.
My grandmother one day walked in and she said, I want you to read this book. It was called It's Up to You. I probably read it 10 times, over the years, and it inspired me.
It put him on the path to helping people, from small-town cop to the FBI, and from civil rights leader all the way up to the White House. Mr. Brown has worked with people around the world fighting for what's right. His mission brought him to South Africa, where he discovered that thousands of books were banned during apartheid. It broke his heart.
I was appalled by that. Books and education mean everything, not just for the individual, but for our society. I started Booksmart, and then we started expanding the book project to schools across South Africa. The need is unbelievably great, but the resources are not there to keep it moving.
Hundreds of donated books turn into millions. And while he never asked for it, Mr. Brown needs help.
My wish for all these books is that we would be able to get to millions of young people who do not have a chance. We're giving them a chance in life. My God. What on earth? Oh my God. We can put a couple million more books in here. This is a complete makeover. I mean, I could never dream this could happen.
My name is Mpumi Nobiva. I am one of the many children Mr. Brown has helped.
Oh, girl.
I have something very special for you.
Oh my goodness, where'd you find this? This is it. This is the book. Here is Mr. Brown, who wanted to grant the wish to continue sharing the power of books with the children of Africa. On behalf of all of them and all of your friends at UPS, thank you. All that's going to count in the end, as my grandmother said, is how much good that you do. If you want to do something with your life, it's all up to you.
And I'm gonna go ahead and show the commercial for UPS because I think that was so darn cool. The marketing company loves that their slogan is Brown can do it, and his name is Mr. Brown. And that the UPS guy was wearing United We Are One on his t-shirt. Do you know how many excuses Mr. Brown could have had to not succeed? How many times he could have said, no, this is too hard, I'm black, I'm in the South, it's, I can't. Once he made his success in the corporate world, he could have stopped. He had it, but he didn't. Make no excuses. When we know that God is on our side, there is no excuse. There is no excuse. So for us to go from managing to leading, be proactive, have the vision, and go for it. Develop your emotional intelligence. Take the time to know that you're okay, and that you can be okay with everyone else, and then make absolutely no excuses. Let's pray. So recognizing that we are one. We are one with this power and presence. There is nothing we don't already have. There is nothing we don't already have. And as our human minds start to argue and make the list of all the things we want that we don't already have, keep in mind that there is, in truth, in consciousness, nothing that we don't already have. And so I accept for each one of us that we put the principles of science and mind to use in our lives. We go from just managing to being leaders in our own lives in a way that is proactive and emotionally intelligent, and where we make no excuses as we move into that greater yet to be, as we become the motive power for good in our lives, in our communities, and in this world. I accept for each one of us that we are here by divine appointment, and that there is something that we are here to do. And that anything that blocks us, any belief we have that there is something more that we need in order to do that, just dissolves away We are always enough. We have never not been enough. And we are more than enough. And so as we take that leap in consciousness, I accept for each one of us that we are leaders in our lives and we are leaders in our communities. We go forward from here knowing that we are powers for good and that all is well. And so recognizing this, I just give thanks for the consciousness of each person here, because it is by the divine co-creative experience of each one of us that we are able to be on that cutting edge, that leading edge of creation, that we are able to make a difference in the world, that we are able to be the leaders that we all already are. And so it is with great gratitude that I just know this. I release these words into that almighty law that makes them so even as I speak them, knowing that love is always the truth between our souls. And recognizing this, I let go. I let this be. I know that all is well. And so it is. If the ushers